House Republican Nancy Mace has openly accused Representative Matt Gaetz of being a fraud.
You've called Matt Gaetz, one of its members, a political D-lister and a fraud. You've sparred with Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'll show our viewers part of that and let them interpret your meaning. How are you going to work with these folks to get anything done for the American people?
It's going to be very difficult. Matt Gaetz is a fraud. Every time he voted against Kevin McCarthy last week, he sent out a fundraising email. What you saw last week was a constitutional process diminished by those kinds of political actions. I don't support that kind of behavior. I am very concerned as someone who represents a lot of centrists, a lot of independents. I have as many independents and Democrats as I have Republicans in my district. I have to represent everybody. I am concerned that common sense legislation will not get through to get a vote on the floor.
Okay. So, look, there's a lot of things in here. Let me just answer the obvious question. Is Matt Gaetz a fraud? Yes. Yeah, of course. But is Nancy Mace also a fraud? Now, that's an interesting question. That said, she references the Kevin McCarthy speakership fight, the drama that had unfolded all last week. Let me note that it's not over policy. It was all about power. And the Freedom Caucus now has a lot more power than they did before. Now, that means other Republicans will have to capitulate to them if they want to, pass anything, which will ultimately fail in the Senate. But what happens is if the Freedom Caucus doesn't like what Kevin McCarthy is doing, it only takes one to remove Kevin McCarthy. So that is a lot of pull. That is a lot of power. Now, that, of course, means House Republicans, what they're going to do is they're going to end up being more unhinged. So now, the thing about that is actually disastrous for the rest of the country is, well, we've got to do things like the Farm Bill, which contains food stamps, the SNAP program. So we want to make sure that people don't go hungry. And so you got to fund the SNAP program. Now, usually at some point, Republicans and Democrats, generally after a little bit of theater, they come together and they go, okay, we'll do these things. We'll give more subsidies to farmers, big corporate farms, but we'll keep food stamp levels the same. Generally, that's what happens. Okay. Then, of course, you have the debt ceiling and the funding of the government. So now Republicans, as I said before, they end up voting for these things because the default on the debt would be a disaster to the donors. Again, the donor class pretty much runs the Republican Party. However, the Freedom Caucus, yes, they care about their donors, but they care more about ideological victories, as in giving everything to the rich and powerful and destroying the government. So that's kind of the whole thing. These lunatics don't want to fund the government at all. They would rather it default and us not have a government. And now the lunatics are running the asylum. And they will be, by the way, demanding massive cuts to food stamps, Social Security, Medicare. And again, could very well send the government into default if they don't get these massive cuts. And unfortunately, what we have is a Democratic Party that is all too willing, I think, or at least has historically folded on these issues. And I go back to actually some of the demands in one of the debt ceiling fights that we had before. Now, this was during the Obama administration, and they had Republicans had proposed a massive cut in, Social Security. President Obama at the time had said, okay, we'll cut Social Security. We'll put it on a changed CPI, which basically, again, amounts to a cut in benefits. Thing is, of course, that didn't happen because Republicans, they went too far. In this case, now Republicans, they have a small majority of people who are more than willing to tank the government unless they get what they want. They are able to take hostages even more effectively than they did before. And if they don't, if Kevin McCarthy does not do what these people want them to do, they'll remove him. So, yes, it's disastrous for everyone, essentially. But anyway, when it comes to Matt Gaetz, getting back to him, did Matt Gaetz fundraise off this? Of course he did. Because that's what Republicans do. That's what Democrats, that's what all politicians do. They fundraise off everything. Now, there was no doubt in anybody's mind that Kevin McCarthy was eventually going to be Speaker. So he took the opportunity during this fight to raise money off of it. Yes, it's a political stunt. They do that. They all do that. And look, nobody else on the Republican side was lined up to get enough votes. And so why not take the opportunity to go and raise some money off the donors? But here's the thing. As I mentioned, pretty much all of them do it. I think Representative Nancy Mace is upset that she didn't come up with the idea first. So, look, she says things, oh, you know, I've got centrists in my district. I'm trying to represent them. I'm trying to be centrist. I'm trying to be in the middle of everything. But whenever she says that, she immediately caves to the far right. She immediately caves to people like Donald Trump. She's going to do the same thing. She's going to complain about Matt Gaetz, who is a grifter. Yes, I think that's very obvious, but you're not going to actually do anything. Nancy Mace hates frauds so much that she always ends up supporting frauds. Weird how that works out. Weird. And she also says that she's afraid that the Freedom Caucus won't govern. That's the whole point. That's the whole point. And by the way, so-called centrists like her, which are not, she's nowhere near a centrist. She doesn't represent centrists. What she is a member of the right wing who continuously legitimizes the far right that continues to go further and further to the right by claiming to be a centrist. By comparing the left, or in this case, she would call them the far left. You know, these are people who want healthcare for everybody, and childcare, and paid leave, and paid vacation. You know, things like that. A better economy for poor people, regular people, tax the rich more. She considers them, as a so-called centrist, to be the members of the far left. And always, again, capitulates to the far right, which again, chases them even further to the right. And she follows them 100%. This is my issue with so-called centrists these days. It doesn't mean anything anymore. So stop considering yourself a centrist and start calling yourself what you are. You're a right-winger. And stop pretending to be better than grifters like Matt Gaetz, whereas calling yourself a centrist at this point is a grift as well. It's just your own one.